Pablo married me a mute for money. I know he despises me. Luckily, I don't like him either. In my mind, I curse his dad, curse his mom, curse his first love. I curse him too. But what I didn't know was that he can read minds. Every word I mutter silently, he hears clearly. Later he heard me say in my heart, "Pablo, I'm dying. You're finally free." Chapter 1. I don't know when Pablo started reading minds. The first time I sensed something was off was when I was furiously cursing his first love right in front of him. "Oh, Pablo darling, quit acting so cute, you're not some little girl anymore. What's with this act?" She knows I can't talk yet still makes me explain myself. Explain what exactly? Pablo suddenly turned, his brows knitted as he looked me up and down. The way he stared at me sent a chill down my spine. I signed to him. "What's wrong?" Pablo's voice was icy. "Do you have a problem with Gloria?" I was stunned. I had just cursed Gloria in my mind, and here he was confronting me, but I could only play dumb, tilting my head and smiling at him with a blank, innocent look. Pablo gave a dismissive scoff and turned back to continue talking to Gloria. His voice was gentle, soft, perfectly warm. I kept my smile on the outside while inside my mind. Idiot. Pablo. Chapter 2. When the event ended, Gloria's reluctance to leave Pablo was written all over her face. Pablo's parents were also there tonight. Seeing the two of them cozied up didn't prompt any reaction from them. In fact, Pablo's mom even pulled me aside with a smile. "Kelly, let those men handle their business. Let's wait in the car." I smiled and nodded. In my mind, like mother, like son. No wonder a shameless son has a shameless mom. "Pablo." I noticed his expression darken. But I thought it was just because I was walking too slowly, and I never would have guessed it was due to him reading my mind. When I waved to him, I tossed in another thought. The idiot's father is just as bad, Pablo. Chapter 3. I waited in the car with his mom for over half an hour. Finally, Pablo and his dad ambled over. He turned to his mom, Celine, and I are heading back to our place. What? His mom seemed taken aback and was about to question him when a look from his dad stopped her. She caught on and smiled knowingly. "All right, you two go home and sleep." As soon as I got out, their car sped off in a flash. Pablo just stood there showing no signs of wanting to head home. I looked at him in confusion. "Pablo, so it's not just Gloria. You have a problem with my parents too. How could he know?" Every time I cursed someone in my head, I looked at Pablo, even more puzzled. But Pablo didn't tell me he could read minds. He only coldly warned, "Don't give Gloria a hard time." She was heartbroken enough when we broke up. Heartbroken, she cried for about 2 minutes. Then, with a heartfelt look, she told Pablo, "Even if you marry someone else, I'll always wait for you." On the day I married Pablo, she showed up too, even wearing a wedding dress. She didn't actually come in though. She just took a picture outside and posted it online. "Wearing my wedding dress, standing where you are. Doesn't that make me your bride too?" That post is still pinned at the top of her profile. To her, it's her deepest love for Pablo. To me, it's the ultimate insult. For that alone, I'd be justified in giving her a hard time. But Pablo came to warn me on her behalf. Inwardly, I let out a cold laugh and boldly let my thoughts spill out. "If you're so in love, why don't you have the guts to divorce me? If it weren't to ease my mom's worries, I'd never have married you. With your dumb look, how dare you disdain me for being mute? You may have a mouth, but I've yet to hear you say anything worthwhile." Celine, Pablo snapped, gritting his teeth as he called my name. Startled out of my rant, I looked at him, asking with just my eyes, "What is it, Pablo? You call me an idiot, though everything I said was true. It's mortifying to be caught in the act." Chapter 4. I signed to Pablo. "How do you know I insulted you, Pablo?" Unwilling to reveal his mind-reading ability, he came up with a flimsy excuse. "Your face says it all." Apparently my expression was enough to convey every curse. Puzzled, I touched my face, incredulous that I'd somehow lost all control over my expressions. Then I plastered on a sincere smile and signed, "I didn't insult you." Pablo closed his eyes, clearly frustrated to the point of internal turmoil. Feigning innocence, I turned and walked to the car on my own. But my mood felt as heavy as the endless dark night where no glimmer of dawn could be seen. The reason Pablo and I married was partly because my mother was gravely ill, and partly because the Fu family's finances had collapsed. I'd always known Pablo married me for money. He despised that I was mute. Fortunately, I didn't like him either. In the year or so we've lived together, every bit of kindness and consideration I've shown has been an act. The doctor said my mom doesn't have much time left, maybe 3 months. For her final days, I don't want her to worry about anything. Even though I despise Pablo, and even though I've wanted a divorce for a long time, I can endure it for my mom's sake. Yet it seems fate has it out for me. I was diagnosed with cancer. The doctor who had been treating my mom was more devastated than I was. Kelly, you're so young. How could this happen? I was heartbroken too. But alongside the sadness, there was a sense of relief. If I die, I can be with my mom again. Maybe that's not so bad. Chapter 5. I stayed at the hospital that night. Late into the evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a friend of Pablo's saying, "Sis-in-law, Pablo's drunk. Could you come pick him up?" Someone nearby hastily reminded him, "You idiot, sis-in-law is mute. She can't talk, so how can she answer you all right?" His voice took on an awkward tone. "Sorry, sis-in-law. If you can come pick him up, could you text me? I hadn't planned to go." But maybe because my time was running out, long-repressed desires were suddenly surging. I wanted to finalize a divorce with Pablo as soon as possible. He'd probably agree. The divorce cooling-off period is only a month. It's short, but it's time that's precious to me. I want a clean break with Pablo before I die. I don't want to be tied to the Fu family even in death. So I went to pick Pablo up and bring him home. He was thoroughly drunk, lying obediently on the couch. In the past, I would have gone to the kitchen to make him some sobering soup. Then I'd help him change and guide him to bed. But tonight, I just sat quietly beside him. I waited for him to wake up, so I could ask for a divorce right away. Chapter 6. Pablo was pampered from a young age, and after we married, I took care of him quite well. Lying on the couch for just a little while he started feeling uncomfortable and sat up with a frown. I stared at him intently. My gaze must have been so cold that it snapped him out of his drunken stupor. For a moment, he seemed more sober. "Why are you staring at me like that?" he asked, irritated. I signed to him, "Let's get a divorce." Pablo couldn't understand. In the year we'd lived together, he'd made little effort to understand me. More complex or less common signs, he was clueless about them, because he'd never cared to learn. Inwardly, I sneered. Talking to an idiot is exhausting. "Pablo." I switched to my phone, typing a line and showing it to him. Still a bit drunk, he stared at the words "get a divorce" in confusion. Divorce? Who's divorcing whom? I pointed to him, then to myself. This time he finally understood. But he couldn't believe that I dared to bring up divorce. Especially considering that I had no one backing me. My father had passed away years ago, and my mother was now bedridden with illness. Our relatives had once tried to snatch our family's assets from my mother. After they failed, they'd resented us ever since. Other than my mom, no one really cared if I lived or died. So Pablo couldn't understand why someone like me would have the nerve to ask for a divorce. He chuckled in disbelief. "You don't actually think you'd have men lining up for you if you divorced me, do you?" I shook my head, keeping my gaze firm. This only frustrated him more. "Fine, if you want a divorce, I agree. But everything we agreed on before stays the same. And your family's investment won't be refunded." I nodded. I considered it payment for my mother's happiness this past year. A costly deal, but what's done is done, and there was no reason to demand it back. Pablo looked at me with utter confusion, even slowing his speech. "Celine, why are you suddenly asking for a divorce?" It was a question he should have asked first. If he'd had even the slightest affection for me. But since he didn't, he'd expressed anger first, only then asking why. I didn't answer, just gave him a small smile. As I stood, Pablo suddenly grabbed my wrist, repeating, "Why do you suddenly want a divorce?" The financial loss was substantial. Without a reason, the sudden demand was baffling. He was probably too used to being adored and couldn't handle being dumped by a mute woman. But if he thought about it, he should be happy. Once we're divorced, he could be with Gloria openly. A wedding, a title. Everything Gloria wanted, he could finally give her. How wonderful for him. Chapter 7. I still remember, when the Fu family first proposed marriage, I had considered living a peaceful life with Pablo. Even without love, a harmonious, steady life would have been enough. People only saw our wealth now, but few knew how close my mom and I had come to being harmed after my father's passing. And it was then that I lost my voice. My mother was always worried no one would want me, and even more worried that I'd be mistreated after marriage. So she gave her all to support the Fu family to help Pablo, hoping that I could be just a bit happier in marriage. But on the day of the wedding, I was thoroughly humiliated. I even asked Pablo if he could speak to Gloria about deleting that pinned post. But Pablo said what people post is their freedom, who are you to control it, and what I do or don't do is also my choice. Don't try to control me. That's when I realized that Pablo wasn't even worth trying to be polite with. After that, I stopped caring about him. In Pablo's mind, my mere existence was a restriction. But finally, that restriction was about to be lifted. Pablo, I'm dying. You're finally free. The thought crossed my mind and Pablo's grip on my wrist loosened. Shock filled his eyes. But I didn't know he'd heard my inner voice. I was just relieved he'd stopped asking why I wanted a divorce, sparing me the need to explain. After all, he didn't love me, didn't care about me. Why would my life or death matter to him? Explaining would only cheapen my dignity. I turned and walked toward the stairs, step by step, heading for the bedroom. With every step, I couldn't help but sigh. What a waste of a handsome face. If only he had a better character, he'd be perfect. And Gloria doesn't seem to love him all that much. Otherwise, why let him bear the burden of being branded a cheater? The two of them deserve each other. At least if they're together, they won't drag anyone else down. But still, it's such a pity I came to this world and never knew what true love felt like. If I'd met someone decent, maybe I'd have experienced it. Pablo isn't worthy. Chapter 8. After I went to bed, Pablo went out to meet his friends. One of his childhood friends, Bruno, noticed his sour expression immediately. On top of that, Pablo still smelled of alcohol, and his clothes were disheveled. Bruno asked, "Did you and Celine have a fight?" Pablo shot him a look, annoyed that he was so accurate, yet also missing the mark. Divorce was far more serious than a fight. And Celine was sick, seriously ill it seemed. Pablo picked up his cup and took a long drink. Only instead of alcohol, he tasted tea. He remembered then that he and Bruno were drinking tea, not liquor. "When did you stop drinking?" Pablo asked. "Bruno, I stopped 2 years ago." "But 2 years ago you quit pretty abruptly." Bruno didn't respond. Pablo continued, "If I remember right, you quit because of Laura, didn't you? She had that much of an impact on you." Bruno shot him a look of his own. "Since when did tea make you talk so much?" Pablo chuckled softly. After a long silence, Bruno suddenly spoke. "She did have a big impact. When she left, my life felt like it died with her. But she didn't mean much to you while she was around. That's why you should cherish people while they're there. You too." Among our group, we ranked ourselves by age. Bruno, the oldest, rarely lectured anyone, especially about relationships. Maybe tonight was different, because we were both feeling down, which opened the floodgates. "Pablo, what do you really think about Celine and Gloria?" "I haven't felt anything for Gloria in a long time. I just felt guilty about the breakup since it was so sudden, and I wanted to make up for it a little." "And Celine, Pablo pondered for a long time, but couldn't find the words. Bruno guessed, "You're used to her, grew fond of her over time." Pablo, "Something like that." It wasn't until tonight, when I suddenly demanded a divorce, that he realized just how terrifying familiarity could be. In that moment, he pictured coming home after work to an empty house, and the thought filled him with unease. So Bruno advised, "If you're over your ex, don't hurt the person by your side." Pablo, "Since when were you so full of life advice? Since I know what it's like to lose someone. Take it from me. Treat Celine well, or you'll regret it." Pablo, "Regret my ass." Bruno gave a cold chuckle. "You better hope you keep that attitude." Chapter 9. The next morning when I woke up, I noticed Pablo was gone, so I texted him, "Where are you?" He didn't reply. After a while, there was movement at the door. I thought Pablo had come back. He'd essentially agreed to the divorce last night after all. Today we needed to visit the marriage registry. But when I opened the door, I saw Gloria standing outside instead. She had never been friendly with me. Without Pablo by her side, she was even more arrogant and mocking. "Let's talk," she sneered. "Oh, I almost forgot." "You're mute," she sneered. Like Pablo, she had a mouth but didn't know how to use it properly. Still, I was curious about what she wanted to talk about and what qualifications she had to talk to me. I stepped aside to let her in. Gloria raised an eyebrow in surprise, then entered and settled onto the sofa. "I went to get paper and a pen for our conversation." Gloria spoke first. "A guest is here, and you're not even offering water?" Who did she think she was? Thankfully, I wasn't in love with Pablo, otherwise she'd have been the enemy right then. I smiled, bowed my head, and wrote, "Let's get straight to the point. Don't waste my time." Gloria sneered coldly. "What? You think marrying Pablo means you're set for life? You'll be divorced sooner or later. It was your Pablo who married me and secured a short-lived peace of mind." I wrote back. "If it weren't for my family's investment, the Fu family would have gone bankrupt long ago. Though they've recovered now, they still wouldn't dare kick me out. If I didn't bring up divorce, Pablo would probably keep living with me." Who did Gloria think she was? I fixed her with an icy stare. No heated arguments, no empty threats. The silent battle of our gazes laid bare the unspoken hierarchy between us. Gloria was enraged and abruptly stood up. "So, what if you have money? You'll always be nothing but a mute." I asked Pablo about it. "You've been married for over a year, and he's never touched you. Even if you don't divorce, you'll never have children. Your father's dead, your mom's dying, and when you're gone, everything you own will." Slap. The loud crack of my slap echoed through the room. Gloria fell back onto the sofa, clutching her face, unable to rise for quite some time. I hit her so hard that my palm went numb. How dare she mention my parents? If she wanted Pablo, I could hand him over, but dragging my parents into it and cursing about life and death? That slap was coming. Chapter 10. After Gloria came to her senses, she began screaming at me. She wanted to hit me, but hearing noises outside signaling Pablo's return, she dialed up her victim act to the maximum. Pablo didn't disappoint her. The moment he walked in and saw the slap mark on her face, he immediately confronted me. "Celine, what have you done?" Here we go again. This scene had played out countless times. Sometimes I felt like just a pawn in their twisted game, existing solely to fuel their sick thrills. But today, I didn't want to play along anymore. I turned around, picked up my phone, unlocked it, and started playing the recording. It was from all those times Gloria mocked, humiliated, and berated me when we were alone. In the recording, Gloria mocked, insulted, and hurled the most vicious curses at me, each venomous word accompanied by cold sneers, flowing relentlessly one after another. Gloria was stunned. Pablo was too. The recording hadn't even finished playing when Gloria snapped back to reality and lunged for my phone. "Gloria." Pablo finally spoke, his voice cold and steady, barely containing his anger. She tried to explain. "Those weren't my words." She faked the recording. "She's slandering me." Pablo closed his eyes briefly. "Get out." "Pablo," she pleaded. "Get out. Don't make me say it a third time." Gloria bit her lip, tears falling in heavy drops. Her acting was truly impeccable. She could burst into tears in an instant. If she ever joined the film industry, she might even bag herself an Oscar. Chapter 11. After Gloria left, Pablo noticed my icy expression and, in a rare moment of gentleness, said softly, "Celine, let's talk." He was parroting Gloria's words. "Disgusting." I smirked coldly, snatched the paper and pen, and scrawled, "We discussed divorce or nothing." Pablo said softly, "This morning I went to the hospital to visit your mom. After over a year of marriage, this was the first time he had visited my mother alone, and that was only after I brought up the divorce." I felt no pleasant surprise, only disgust. "You agreed to my conditions. Why did you even go see my mom? Your mother still doesn't know about your illness, does she? How did he know I was sick?" Stunned, I shot to my feet, my composure completely shattered. Pablo locked eyes with me and enunciated each word. "No more writing. I can't hear your thoughts." I froze. So that's why he'd always confronted me whenever I cursed his father, his mother, or Gloria in my thoughts. He heard every single word I cursed. "When did you start hearing my thoughts?" 6 months ago, the night you returned from the hospital," he said. "My mom's condition suddenly worsened that night. The doctor said there was another treatment we could try, but it had low chances of success. After my mother fell asleep that night, I sat by her hospital bed until 2 a.m. The caregiver had gone home to sleep, but came back to the hospital late that night. She held my hand and said, "Celine, I was worried about you." A hired caretaker left her warm bed in the middle of the night, all because she was worried about me. And Pablo? That night, he was out getting wasted. And guess who was with him? Gloria. Gloria openly posted about it on social media, enjoying herself openly, while I was in agony, unable to even cry out loud. Chapter 12. I hadn't expected Pablo's mind-reading ability to manifest precisely that day. When I returned home at 4 a.m. that night, he had also just arrived back. He must have noticed my foul mood and muttered something under his breath. I was too upset at the time, thinking he resented me for not taking care of him when he was drunk. Only today did I realize he had actually noticed my distressed expression and asked what happened. "Why did you have to make my mom sick?" "Pablo deserves to be sick, not her. He should die." Pablo fell silent. At first, he couldn't believe he could hear my inner thoughts. But after hearing them time and again, he gradually grew accustomed to it. Every time, I would be smiling on the outside, but cursing him inside. 8 out of 10 inner thoughts were insults aimed at him. The remaining 2 times were spent cursing his parents and Gloria. Pablo muttered, "I always thought you were a petty person. You couldn't stand that I stayed friends with Gloria after we broke up. You cursed her in silence every time. I didn't know she had been bad-mouthing you too. She had cursed me a lot, and it had been pretty nasty. But neither he nor Gloria knew I had recorded every instance. At first, I didn't intend to use the recordings against Gloria. I just wanted to keep something handy in case things went south, so I wouldn't be left defenseless. But Gloria served herself up on a silver platter. If I didn't strike now, she'd only grow more audacious later. I stared coldly at Pablo and asked through my thoughts, "Now that you know everything, what now?" Pablo pursed his lips, words caught in his throat. He didn't want to talk about Gloria, and I didn't push him. Instead, I asked, "When are we going to the Civil Affairs Bureau to file for divorce?" Pablo said, "Celine, you should focus on getting better. What I do or don't do is none of your business." These were his words from back then, and now I was throwing them right back at him. Without another word, I turned and left. Behind me, Pablo called out, "Celine, where are you going?" "None of your business, dumbass." Pablo fell silent. Chapter 13. I went to the hospital. The nurse greeted me with a smile. "Young Master Fu came by this morning." I nodded. She noticed I wasn't surprised and asked softly, "Did you two reconcile?" I shook my head and took out my phone to type a message for her. "We're getting divorced." The caregiver was startled and gripped my hand. Was it his idea? I was the one who filed for divorce. I was the one who didn't want Pablo. Even if others might see him as handsome and capable, he neither loved nor cared about me. That's why I let him go. The caregiver noticed the resolve in my expression and instantly understood. "What will you do now?" she asked gently. Dad had passed away long ago, and Mom was about to follow. I was battling a serious illness myself. Even with all the money in the world, I still couldn't find someone who truly cared. The nurse seemed even more heartbroken than I was, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I lowered my head, afraid to meet her gaze. If our eyes locked, the tears would come. But my cries were silent. Silent pain, like a boomerang, flowed out with my tears, only to circle back unseen and pierce my heart anew. I knew that feeling all too well, a pain so excruciating it made me wish I could die right then and there. Chapter 14. The nurse said Pablo had a long talk with my mom this morning. After he left, Mom quietly wiped away tears. The nurse didn't dare ask more questions, afraid of upsetting Mom further. But I wanted to know. I texted my mom. "What did Pablo say to you this morning?" "What else could he say?" Mom beamed. "He said your relationship's been warming up lately, and I should prepare to welcome my grandchild." "He won't." "Why not?" Mom lightly rolled her eyes at me. "Didn't you always say Yen Kai was good to you?" That was all a lie. To make the lies more convincing, I even bought myself gifts and pretended they were from Pablo. In Mom's eyes, Pablo was busy, but still treated me well. Now, I had to personally expose my own lies. Mom, Pablo and I are getting a divorce. Mom wasn't shocked, just a bit surprised. She asked softly, "Did Pablo mistreat you?" "The one he loves isn't me." "I see." Mom hugged me, her forced composure collapsing in an instant. She choked. "Our Celine is such a wonderful daughter. It's his loss if he can't see that. You've endured so much for my sake. It must have been so hard on you." I shook my head. It wasn't hard at all. Even though Pablo remained entangled with Gloria after marriage, I don't love him. So I'm not sad or upset. Just find it ridiculous. What hurt the most was not filing for divorce sooner and not telling my mom the truth earlier. That way, my mom wouldn't have heard Pablo say those words. I don't love her. I imagined how heartbroken my mom must have been when Pablo told her that this morning. The precious one she cradled in her palms was cast aside so carelessly. Mom cried, and so did I. But through her tears, Mom reassured me, "Don't worry, Celine. You're wonderful, and you'll find someone better someday. Let that foo guy stew in regret for losing you." I nodded, smiling. But deep down, I knew Pablo wouldn't regret it. And I wouldn't have a future. Chapter 15. Pablo was probably worried about money, dragging his feet on the divorce. I sent him several messages, but he either said he was busy or didn't respond at all. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and broke the news of the divorce to his parents. They were furious. "We've turned a blind eye to the thing with Gloria, but you need to be more careful. You can't let Celine reach her breaking point. If she takes this public, people will sympathize with her given her single-parent status and being mute, which will harm your reputation and the company's stock price. Go apologize to Celine right now. No matter what happens, divorce is not an option." After scolding Pablo, they turned to me with emotional appeals. They brought piles of gifts to the hospital for my mother, telling her how utterly delighted they were with me. "We'll scold Yan Kai for anything he did wrong and make sure he corrects it promptly. Kelly, you can't mention divorce just because you're upset in the heat of the moment. Those words are the most damaging to a marriage." "Relationship? What relationship do I have with that idiot Pablo?" Just then, Pablo stepped into the ward and heard every single one of my inner thoughts. He scowled. I gazed innocently, tacking on in my mind, complete moron. No matter how much I cursed at him, only he could hear me. In his parents' eyes, I remained the aggrieved party. Pablo, at a loss for words, simply took me outside. He said, "I can agree to anything except getting a divorce. Asterisk, would you be okay with me having a lover? Asterisk. Celine. Asterisk, just divorce me already, so I can have some peace before I die. Asterisk. Do you really hate me that much?" I was taken aback by his question, but the look on his face was dead serious. He said, "Celine, let's give us another chance, shall we?" Chapter 16. I suspected Pablo had been driven crazy by his parents. How else could he say such absurd things? Had we ever begun? If we never even started, how can there be talk of trying again? I thought to myself solemnly, enunciating each word, "Pablo, I never had feelings for you. Even from the start, I only wanted to live a peaceful life. It was never about affection. Since I still want an amicable split, let's get the divorce processed. If you drag this out, I'll file for divorce in court. If things get messy, it's not just my face that'll be lost anyway." Pablo scoffed, his teeth clenched. "Celine, I truly underestimated you." "I'm flattered." As Pablo was fuming, the caregiver suddenly rushed in, urgently calling out, "Celine." I looked up and met her frantic gaze. My heart sank with a dreadful premonition. The nurse urged me to return to the ward quickly. "Your mom, it's bad. She's asking for you." A thunderclap seemed to explode in my ears, leaving a persistent buzz reverberating through my head. Luckily, the nurse supported me and helped me get back to the room quickly. Doctors and nurses crowded around in a dense cluster. Pablo's parents were also there, looking worried. His mom tried to comfort me. "Kelly, don't worry. We're getting the best doctor. Your mom will be fine." "She won't be fine. We were rich enough to afford any medicine, to hire the best doctors. Only life and death remain beyond our control. After a series of examinations, the doctor turned to us and shook his head in resignation. At that moment, I felt my heart softly shatter. As the doctors and nurses stepped back, I saw my mother reaching out to me. I instinctively walked up, trembling as I took her hand. "Kelly," Mom's voice was faint, barely a whisper. "I have to go now. Don't cry." I wanted to honor her wishes, to let her depart peacefully. But my tears kept streaming down uncontrollably. Mom lifted her other hand to wipe my tears. But she was too weak. It only lifted a little before falling back down. "Celine, don't cry." I nodded desperately, my mouth opening as I tried to speak. I remember that when I was a child, I could speak. I called Dad, I called Mom. If I could call her Mom now, would it lessen some of the regret? But I couldn't make a sound. No matter how wide I opened my mouth, not a sound escaped, until Pablo stepped forward and gently told my mother, "Kelly wants to call you Mom." In her clouded eyes, a faint light suddenly glimmered. She smiled and nodded at me. "I heard you." Then she motioned for everyone else to exit, leaving only me and Pablo in the room. I thought she was going to tell him to take care of me, but instead, she grabbed his hand and almost pleadingly whispered, "Can you agree to divorce Kelly?" Pablo froze, his gaze shifting to my face. I abruptly stopped crying and placed my hand over my chest. It hurt so much, as if something deep within had finally shattered completely. Previously, my mom worried that after her death there would be no one to care for me, so she wanted to find someone to look after me. Now, she was worried I'd be mistreated after her death, so she begged Pablo to set me free. "Will you agree to divorce Celine?" Pablo, either unable to refuse her dying wish or moved by a sudden pang of conscience, finally relented. Mom let out a relieved sigh and stroked my head. "Celine, just be yourself and live happily from now on." "Okay. Mom's going to find Dad now. You come later. Be our daughter in the next life." "Yes." "Celine?" In the last moment, I held her in my arms. She passed away in my arms. I held her hand, feeling her life slip away bit by bit. "Mom, I might have to disobey you one last time. I'm coming to join you and Dad now." Chapter 17. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital room. Pablo was sitting at my bedside. I didn't know how long it had been, but stubble had already sprouted on his jaw. Seeing me stir under the covers, Pablo quickly said, "I've already made arrangements for your mom's funeral."
Don't worry.
"Get out." The single sharp word left Pablo stunned. He held back his anger and said, "Celine, I promised your mom we'd get divorced. Can't you at least try to hate me a little less?" "I won't stop hating you until you're dead." Pablo. Getting nowhere, he stood up and went outside to smoke a cigarette and cool off. When he came back, he saw me quickly typing something on my phone. Pablo immediately sensed something was wrong and snatched the phone from my hands with a swift reach. When he saw what I had typed, his eyes widened. "Celine, must you be like this? I've told you before, if you refuse to divorce me, I won't hesitate to take this public." I was ready to send a divorce statement. I didn't care whether it affected Pablo's reputation or Fu Group stock price. I'm dying anyway. Why should I care about anyone else's lives? Pablo stared at me for a long time, seeing no sign of retreat. Finally, he sighed in utter resignation. "Celine, I promised your mom I'd divorce you." "Don't mention my mom. If you hadn't gone to the hospital and told her you didn't love me, she wouldn't have been so upset and passed away so soon." Pablo paused for a moment and explained, "I didn't say that. I went to the hospital to check on your condition. Since I was already at the hospital, I thought I'd visit your mom while there, but I never said those words." It wasn't what Pablo said, but my mom's sharpness that led her to figure out the truth from his demeanor. Pablo apologized. "It's my fault. I should have told you first. If we had, at least we could have been prepared. We might have coordinated our stories better so Mom wouldn't have pieced things together." I was filled with resentment, but upon reflection, I realized I had no one to blame but myself. If I had spoken up sooner about not liking Pablo, If I hadn't swallowed my pride on our wedding day. So many if-onlys. I'm exhausted. Chapter 18. The Fu family had originally planned a grand funeral for my mother, but at my request, everything was kept simple. After the burial, I moved back to my own home. Paparazzi tailing Pablo captured him visiting my apartment building multiple times, though he never stepped inside. Naturally, rumors spread that our two families had fallen out and that Pablo and I were divorcing. This news caused the Fu Group's stock price to drop. Pablo's parents came to see me, hoping I would move back in. Celine, you should consider our perspective too. To be honest, Pablo hasn't done you any wrong. If our family falls apart, what's in it for you? Why keep causing all this drama? Mom, Pablo rushed over and interrupted his mother. Please go home first. His parents were displeased, remaining rooted in place with stony expressions. Pablo turned to look back at me. He saw me sitting there motionless. My heart remained completely silent. Suddenly, he seemed to grow anxious. He stepped forward and asked, Celine, would you like to go out for a walk with me? Since moving back, I hadn't stepped outside for over half a month. In this big house, I was completely alone. I couldn't speak. No one spoke to me. I let myself sink deeper and deeper into this soundless world. Chapter 19. Pablo ignored his parents and took me outside. After getting in the car, he asked, Is there somewhere you'd like to go? I gazed out at the sunlight streaming through the car window, so fiercely bright. It was as if the lifeless blood within me had suddenly surged back to life. I thought, I want to go to the mall. Pablo nodded. He knew I wasn't in the mood for shopping, but he did as I asked. I bought a bright red dress and had the sales associate do my makeup. Pablo began to realize my intention. I wanted to dress up and present myself in the best way to visit my parents. When we arrived at the cemetery, the sunset hung perfectly in the sky. The blazing afterglow draped the tombstones in molten gold. I stood before the grave, lifting the hem of my red dress, and spun gently. At the same time, I asked in my heart, Mom, Dad, do I look nice today? Does it look like that birthday when I was little when you were both still here and I wore a red dress? If I come to you like this, will you still know it's me? Living all by myself is so tiring. I miss you both terribly. Pablo stood behind me, hearing every word I spoke in my heart. I didn't care if he heard. By now, nothing mattered to me anymore. But Pablo refused to let go. He moved closer and wrapped his arms around me from behind. His hoarse voice trembled with restrained emotion. Celine, the hospital called. They found a perfect match. After the transplant, you could have a full life ahead. There's no need. But you once said you didn't want to remain tied to the Fu family even after death. I've scheduled the surgery for a month later. We'll handle the divorce paperwork at the Civil Affairs Bureau first, then you can undergo the surgery. By the time you recover, the divorce certificate will be ready. That offer was actually quite tempting. At least before Mom passed away, I would have agreed without hesitation. But now I don't want to keep living at all. The physical pain was bearable, but the ache in my heart threatened to devour everything. Pablo, I'm tired. Please, I beg you, agree to the surgery. I shook my head. Suddenly, cold liquid dripped onto my neck, and then Pablo's voice became even hoarser. Your parents would want you to live well. Do it for them, not for me, okay? We can go to the Civil Affairs Bureau first, then you can go into the operating room. Celine? Okay. Chapter 20. On the day we went to get the divorce certificate, Pablo looked in a good mood. He wore a brand new suit with his shirt collar perfectly stiff. He looked down at the little book in his hand, then lifted his head to say, I'll take you to the hospital. I shook my head, but he insisted on taking me. It's a deal that after we get the divorce certificate, you'll go straight to the operating room. If I don't see it with my own eyes, what if you run away halfway? I didn't respond. For some reason, I had a strange feeling today. Even though Pablo seemed to be at ease, there was a heavy aura around him. When we arrived at the hospital, everything was ready. Pablo followed me to the door of the operating room. Before I went in, he leaned in and said, Celine, don't be afraid. Everything will be okay. I wasn't afraid at all. In fact, he seemed to be the one more afraid. Maybe Bruno's words that early morning had woken him up. Maybe after all this time he had developed feelings. But it was too late. It was all too late. The surgery was a success. Before I was discharged, a lawyer from Fu Group came to see me and asked me to sign some papers. It was the compensation Pablo had voluntarily offered after our divorce. When converted, it was almost half of the money my family had originally invested. The lawyer said it was the biggest compensation Pablo could offer within his means. Pablo didn't show up. For a long time after, he neither appeared in front of me nor in the public eye. Even Pablo's parents became much more low-key. When the gossip media directly asked about Pablo, they avoided the topic. I transferred all the family assets into an account balance. Then I left. The weather that day was terrible, with rain falling nonstop. I stood by the glass wall at the airport watching the rain fall outside. Suddenly, I saw a familiar figure in the reflection. But when I turned to look, the crowd passing by was made up of strangers. They hurried along, all chasing after a better life. None of them had time to look back at the road they had come. Chapter 21. 2 years later, during the Chinese New Year, Pablo, who hadn't been seen for a long time, posted an update on his social media. Happy New Year. The accompanying photo showed an airport background. But in the photo, there was no one else except the reflection in the glass. It seemed like no one knew who he was wishing a Happy New Year. And yet it seemed like everyone knew. After Pablo posted the update, he was about to put down his phone when suddenly a strange call came in. The number was from abroad. When he answered, there was a long silence on the other end. Then a voice finally came through. Happy New Year. It wasn't a voice in his head. It was a real, clear voice, soft and sweet like the sound of heaven. Pablo didn't respond, and the call ended soon after. But that day became the happiest New Year of Pablo's life. She said, Happy New Year. Celine, may you be happy too.